Welcome back, Darts Aloud listeners. And I think probably if anyone's followed this podcast, you'll always hear me say this is, a fantastic and interesting subject. And I think they always are. And it's just like, sometimes I can't even better the idea for me for today's podcast in terms of the most interesting. And yeah, I know I said it before, so maybe it'll happen again. But we're going to talk about biblical cosmology and the rise of the modern flat Earth movement. And you're going to be sitting there going, what? And so, so get ready and buckle up for a really interesting, fascinating show.
Okay, so I think the probably best place to start is back to you, Andrew, with just exactly what does the Bible say about cosmology and how it all works.
Okay, so to start with, what we can do is put this link that we're looking at an image now of ancient Hebrew conception of the universe, and we'll put this in a link for anyone listening, and they can go and look up what we're seeing and describing now. And so basically for the last 200 years, a lot has been discovered about ancient Near Eastern contextual cultures around the origins and surrounding the time of Hebrews, and to show that there's actually a similar concept going on in other nations. And so what we've got is a good diagram here that actually shows something that you can first of all get an idea. If you've ever read Genesis and you're reading it sort of just in a straightforward way, it talks about a lot of division, a lot of separation. It separates the light from the dark, and then we go to separate the waters from the waters, which is strange. And then you separate the below waters from land, which comes up, and then the below waters are called seas. So you've got this dome or this firmament, and there's a lot of discussion over history about the firmament, but it's only relatively recently people have tried to make it non-firm and non-hard, because this word is being used in ancient literature outside the Bible and in the Bible, and its roots are to do with something firm and hard because it's separating the original primal waters. Ultimately, you've got waters above this firmament, and you've got the great deep, which is under the earth, and that's under the land. So Ed and Francis, if you'd like to just sort of look at some of those aspects of this biblical, what's called biblical cosmology.
So the stars were on our side of the firmament. The waters above the firmament, did they come through the windows as rain? Was that how?
Yeah. In the flood, I mean, when you read the flood story and the creation story together, you can see certain parts look the same in terms of language, and it's argued that that's one of the sources of Genesis. And so you've got this great deep, and you've got the waters above. In the flood, the great deep comes up. So it's not just the rain. And then you've got the waters above come through windows. Now, of course, even when I was a teenager reading that, you immediately read in modern cosmology that you're taught at school. You read into the text and you think windows are just a metaphor for just raining. The windows are, and it's easy to do that. It's very natural to do that. And without thinking, hey, what did other cultures actually think? Where did that water come from? Did they have an understanding of clouds? Probably not. It's a blue sky. We got blue sea in certain places. Hey, there's water up there being held up. It might have been an ancient, well, it was the way that other ancient literature writes. It is that sort of case. And so the flood, there's little ways that this water can come through, but not all of it. A lot of it probably came up from the deep, according to the text for the flood. And you've got this one landmass. There's no indication there's different land masses. Oddly enough, somebody might want to bring out Pangea with that, we've thought there was one landmass, and so some people have. They've gone, wow, see, the Bible talks about one landmass, and so this is what people do all the time. Try to fit anything that we discover in, and then things change anyway. But in an ancient view, if you get back to the context, it's not just the Bible. The Bible is really reflecting what all the other nations were saying. And so at this point, I'd like to play an audio from a well-known a conservative evangelical scholar, but a proper bona fide scholar who's so in one sense open with the text. He's realizing that you have to acknowledge that the Bible reflects ancient cosmology and it's not modern science cosmology. How is he going to blend that with faith? Well, that's another question. I want to play this clip to see what you think about what he's saying about this whole thing. Okay, the Bible has old cosmology. How does that affect inspiration? And this is really interesting. So let me just play this clip now.
All these concepts and even some of the terms are part of ancient Near Eastern cosmology. In other words, what I'll show you tonight, the division of the world, what the world looks like in Israelite cosmology, you can find the same descriptions anywhere else. Egypt, Mesopotamia, ancient Syria, the Hittites, whatever. Because this was a common worldview. Now, if we say that Israel knew better through special divine revelation, then we have a problem. Then we have to say that the literature of the pagans, somehow they knew too. Did God speak to them? Where'd they get that information? I really don't want pagan literature to be in any way even looking inspired. Okay, that opens a real can of worms for inspiration. It's just ground we need to stay away from, and for good reason. It's legitimate to stay away from it. If we let the Bible be what it is, though, we can claim it's unique theologically in what it says about God. But if not, then pagan literature is essentially on the same level. And trust me, you don't want to go there. You want it to be unique.
I'm struggling a little bit in that I've listened to it 3 times now, and I'm not completely sure what he's saying in terms of the inspiration of a non-biblical text.
He's coming from scholarly point of view with all his peers, probably non-Christian scholars or very liberal scholars, all looking at the data and saying it's just basically unavoidable. All the surrounding nations have this flat earth cosmology, this dome, this hard dome in Genesis over a landmass that's flat, Sheol underneath the land, and then the great deep under pillars under that. That's what this picture sort of depicts, the way the Bible in many passages talks about it. All of these elements are found outside the Bible in older cultures. Okay, so once he's saying that, and then you have this is where sort of I can look at it as a human book and say, of course, what's the most natural thing? Well, the natural thing is a human writers taking human ideas and having their little version of it. It's quite easy, it's quite simple. But once you have God and inspiration and infallibility of the Bible, this is where the flat earth movement will come in later against this guy. But once he's doing that, he's going to say, oh, if the Bible is a unique revelation of God, which was how it was seen up until, say, 200 years ago, but the Bible is unique to all other nations, then suddenly you're thinking, okay, so if this cosmology is inspired to be put in there by God, did he then inspire the surrounding nations with the same information? How did they know? If it's human understandings progressing, then it's easy. They all knew because they were all thinking similar things or passing things around or having guesses. If it's revelation from God, why did the pagans, you go to a thing about Marduk and you say, gosh, how did Marduk know? And how did the believers in Marduk know that this cosmology was real?
Maybe, I don't know. I suppose I always had in mind, because this is how I would have thought as a Christian, that that it actually happened as per Genesis with everything and the flood and all that sort of thing, and people are just told, just had a tradition that was based on reality, and they all passed it down, and it got a bit shaky around the edges, and they misunderstood things, and then God sort of stepped in, and when the Bible's authors wrote it all up, he made sure they kind of got it back to reality.
Right. Obviously, because the other
improved it. So all the mistakes put in Gilgamesh about the flood,
right,
were the flood happened and Gilgamesh knew it, or whoever the author of that was. But it's only when it's written down in Genesis that the accurate version back to how it actually was reintroduced. That's how I would have thought.
Yeah. Well, this is a bit different because this is still what is in the Bible in this final sense that you just mentioned is in fact the ancient cosmology. And so if it's tidying it up, yes, there's a lot of differences in the ancient Near Eastern stories about how God made. There was more warfare, more battles, more dragons, more this sort of stuff. And it was very, very different. So biblical scholars would argue that in fact Genesis was taking all these elements and also turning elements on its head. The sun now wasn't a thing to worship. It's just a light placed in there. The moon was another light, but of course it still seems to be an
that's definitely how I see it.
Yeah.
But if I was trying to be a
in the church
ultra literal Christian, young earth, flat earth, everything, I would tell a story like that clearly God told Adam in the garden how it all worked, and it gave him a lesson in cosmology, and that got passed down, and
but then would you be saying that's your view now? You'd saying that Adam was actually being told, if say that was the belief, that God was telling, even God got the cosmology wrong, would you be saying that then?
No, if I was a young earth, I think this cosmology is accurate.
Well, I think that's the problem isn't it, that they both the surrounding nations and their stories and the Bible and its story all share this mistaken view. So it's not that it's been put right by the Bible. The Bible is reflecting the inaccurate.
That's exactly, Francis, what Michael Heiser, who we've just heard on audio, is doing. He's saying, take the Bible in context. It's reflecting an ancient cosmology within the reasoning of God. He didn't want to put in the actual cosmology that we have so far discovered, which might have more growth and room in it, black holes and metaverses and multiverses. But as we know it, we can't really go back. We're in a spherical Earth, we're in a solar system, we're a little pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan said. This isn't the ancient worldview. There were no way a pale blue dot. The Earth was first, the Earth was center, the sun was a little thing up there within the dome. The stars were within the dome. The stars could fall to Earth in biblical understanding. A star, like a light in the Truman Show, if you've seen the movie. That's what they thought a star could do, fall to Earth like that, maybe a bit bigger, like a comet or something, but not a star in the sense of a sun, which is so-called 200 times the size of Earth or something, or more. So the question, Ed, is what you're thinking, is that somehow the Bible corrected all the ancient views and still left with a biblical flat Earth with a hard dome.
Yes.
Yes. And so as a Christian in the church, is that what you thought?
No,
the world was
I
like that.
I wasn't being an earth creationist. I'm trying to put myself in their shoes.
Trying to put yourself in their shoes. So
thinking how I thought that, there were other issues that I had to deal with.
Okay, yeah. So Michael Heiser is a biblical scholar, conservative, knows his stuff. He has to, basically, you're not saying it, but he's admitted defeat. You cannot argue the modern cosmology that we are currently understanding from the Bible. It's not what it says.
Exactly.
So whereas Ken Ham and all of that, they will read into Genesis the entire modern cosmology. Okay. The only difference is that the world is 6,000 years old and evolution isn't true. But in terms of the sun, moon, and stars, they also argue that the stars were made after the Earth and the Earth was made first. So Ken Ham and that lot will forced to disagree with mainstream in many ways. But when it comes to the hard dome and a flat Earth, they will then say that's not what the Bible teaches. There isn't a hard dome. It's an expanse it looks like our sky, and we're on a spherical Earth, and we are in space at this size. The sun is there. Space is real. All the flat earthers deny all of that. They go so extreme, they deny almost anything we know about anything.
Yes.
Whereas young earthers will deny they have to have an Adam and Eve for original sin, for salvation. So you've got to have a literal garden, probably a talking snake. But when it comes to that hard dome, we'll do anything to reinterpret. That's what Ken Ham does. Okay. Whereas Michael Heiser doesn't. He goes, no, it is a hard dome. You say, well, what? But we haven't got a hard dome. Yeah, I know, because God just put in there their ancient understanding, because he wasn't really concerned with really talking about that. It was just the current understanding, and then we get on to what we're really talking about. So that's why Michael Heiser was doing it. But I just thought that he's saying, what I didn't like about what he said, or found quite obvious, was that you don't want pagans to be on the same level as the Bible. The Bible has to be unique, but it isn't in this area. It's unique in other ways. And that's the difference between Ken Ham and Michael Heiser. The Bible is showing itself to be so ancient, cosmological, it's not unique anymore. It's just normal. It's just what everyone believed. And that's not what you want, he says. We don't want that. We want the Bible to be different. Unfortunately, in this area, it's not. And that to me says a lot more than I think he was wanting to be read that way from him.
Yeah.
So, right, let's go into some of the.
I'd like to do a little shout out here to Skydive Phil.
Yeah.
He actually got into this, and he had a discussion with Jeff Swearick of Reasons to Believe.
Yeah.
Which they've done them on Unbelievable, but this was on this very issue. And Jeff, personally, I'm so biased, but I thought Jeff came out really badly in this discussion.
Right.
Of trying to sort of say that the Bible wasn't talking about a firmament that was actually a solid object, and basically all the stuff that you've just said is untenable.
Yeah.
Mm.
And Phil, who's not a Hebrew scholar or anything, was great on it.
He was, wasn't he? I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, we should definitely link to that, because I thought Phil was actually brilliant in handling a whole range of things which aren't even things that are particularly within his field, and yet obviously he knew his stuff. I mean, they both agreed that they were not Hebrew scholars, and yet Phil was really able to push back on Jeff's challenges. And yes, I thought Phil, again, like you, I'm probably biased, but I just thought Phil was, the clear winner in that.
It's not actually hard. All you need to do is get Michael Heiser as a conservative, or even Peter Enns sitting in there talking to Phil, and you'd have had a massively different discussion. Massively different. Because both of them, in other words, it's not hard, because even though you're not a biblical scholar, let me just go and get a biblical scholar then, who knows Hebrew, and sit down with the person who's trying with Jeff. I mean, not with Phil, and they will have a debate that will be very, very different, because Jeff will be trying to use the Bible to fit an understanding of current science, and Peter Enns and Michael Heiser will be saying you can't do that, because you cannot make a hard dome into the expanding universe as you're trying to do. You're messing about with the text from an ancient. You're playing with ancient mindsets. A game that they would never have even understood what you were doing. Yeah. Whereas Michael Heiser and Peter Enns would say, we are trying to understand the conceptual mindset back then. So in other words, what I'm saying, if I was to flip it, if the world was flat and it had a hard dome, the Bible wouldn't be a problem. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And this leads on to why some people have gone that way. They've gone so far. They've gone flip. So that we are on a flat earth with a hard dome, then the Bible's right. So even those people are showing what the Bible says, and they're fundamentalist literalists. And so there is a strange bedfellow between biblical Hebrew scholars and actual fundamentalists extremists. They both actually read the Bible the same way, but one says that's why it isn't true against modern science at that level.
Yes.
Even Peter Enns, he say, I'll accept Adam and Eve, he said, when we accept a hard dome in a flat earth.
Yeah,
some people have done that. And we're going to talk about that later. And so Jeff Swearick is vastly would be out of his league against a Hebrew scholar, I would say.
Yeah,
vastly. So anyway,
can I say something?
Yep.
A bit of a side note, but just in researching this, I was really struck by the suddenly getting something, because I always thought, this is what's going on. This stupid author of Genesis, he has the light and day, day and night, light and darkness, day and night, and all thing on day one.
Yeah.
And then a few days later, the sun and the moon are created. And surely they can't be that stupid. But if you see it in this cosmology, it's fine. There's no problem at all.
Brilliant.
You have to, what you have to do is to disconnect daylight from sunlight. And
we just have to try
you have a day with you don't see the sun at all, but it still gets light and dark. So why would you think that sunlight is exactly the same as daylight?
Well, the problem is that we're reading. John Walton is another guy like Michael Heiser, conservative, but gone over this way to accept the ancient science and cosmology. And he had an audience. He read some of Genesis 1, the firmament and the days and everything, just like you talked about, Ed, and the daylight. And he put in modern Carl Sagan sort of Earth and solar system, right? He put that on the screen while he was reading it. And then he did it again, or something quite close to this. And he put the map with the model we just saw up when reading Genesis. Yeah. And he says, Now, do you notice what you were doing there? You were listening to Genesis and you're thinking of the earth in a solar system as we understand it in modern science. So you're listening to, and day one, he did this. So you're thinking of rotation straight away. You're thinking of the earth on its axis rotating as you read Genesis, which is what all of us did in the church. All of us did that. I never read Genesis thinking it's a flat earth or it's a hard dome, because I was already picturing, as I was reading it, this spherical earth on rotation. Then he put the picture up of the hard dome, then read the text. And it says, now say that this is what current people who were readers thought of the world. They would not have even got anywhere close to thinking about a rotating earth and daylight and sunlight based on the sun. They would have said, well, light is this sort of thing that's just there. There's lights that God threw in there, little ones for seasons and days, but that's not the origin of whatever light is. Perfectly normal, as you were saying, Ed, for the background then. Completely crazy for modern science. So the idea is to try and rid ourselves of all modern science and stop reading it into the text, basically. and so that's that. Francis, you were going to say something on that?
No, I don't think so. No,
right,
no.
Okay. I've got a quote from Peter Enns basically going into this idea of a hard dome, and he's got some interesting points. So this is Peter Enns, sort of, I'd say, is a liberal Christian. He would say progressive evangelical, whatever, but somewhere akin, bit further over than Michael Heiser, who we heard on audio. Now he's going here. Look, he's saying one of those. This is in one of Peter Enns' books. He said one of the issues concerns the second day of creation, where God made the expanse or the firmament. Different translations. The Hebrew word for this is rakia. You would have heard, we're just talking this. Biblical scholars understand rakia to be a solid dome-like structure. It separates the water into two parts, so that there was water above the rakia and water below it. And so he goes, so anyway, there's debate and discussion on this, and he gets some points about it to sort of support this. The other cosmologies from ancient world depict some solid structure in the sky. The most natural explication of rakia is that it also reflects this understanding. There is no indication that Genesis is a novel description of the sky. It's not. Virtually every description of rakia from antiquity to the Renaissance depicts it as solid. The non-solid interpretation of rakia is a novelty. According to the flood story, the waters above were held back only to be released through the floodgates of heavens, literally lattice windows. Other Old Testament are consistent with rakia being solid. I think he doesn't mention it here, but in Job it talks about who can create the expanse beaten out like molten metal. Okay, I mean, if you want to be a fundamentalist biblicist, read your Bible. Beaten out molten metal. How is that the sky that we currently know? And so this is the points that he's making and others are making on this. So any feedback on that?
How, given that, I mean, would they have had access to glass? I'm just wondering how they saw this as something that or perhaps they didn't think they could see through it. They just thought it was like a sort of blue. I mean, did they think that the blue was the water? Did they think?
Yeah,
I
think.
Yeah, that's right. I think the blueness
of
the sky is the water.
Yes, they did have ideas.
How did they think they could see through this beaten
crystal
structure?
Crystal in Isaiah, sorry, not Isaiah, in Ezekiel, it also brings up the firmament again and speaks of it as akin to crystal.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
There's a whole bit I was reading in the book, which is in one of John Loftus' books, The Christian Delusion, and it was called Why the Bible is Not the Word of God, arguing, of course, for ancient cosmology in the Old Testament, showing that, in fact, that shows it's not the Word of God. Although, like I said, Peter Enns, Michael Heiser would say, I agree with the ancient cosmology, but it doesn't mean it's not the Word of God. This is where the tension is right now. It can still be the Word of God and have an ancient cosmology, is the difference. But yes, a sky, I think it's to do with crystal sea, and sort of it's like, so you can have this hard see-through thing to see the blue water above. But then my understanding on reading the text is that people have very, very different, even literalistic readings in the Hebrew of what these phrases means. And I was looking at two other things that go into this. The Bible speaks about the ends of the earth. You've heard that.
Yes.
Yep.
It'd be the ends of the earth. And so the sort of ancient cosmology language uses the same thing, but the Bible is a little bit fluid on this, and I'll tell you why. Because eretz, the word for land in Hebrew, is either earth, translated earth, the ground, or the land. And to talk about the ends of the land, some people may have just seen it as the ends of the. It's still not like different like our continents now, because you go to the end of the land, you get a ship and go to another one. But in their mind, they probably had a view of one earth, and then a sea. There was a separation of one land. So the ends of the land might have been to the farthest ends of where you could go on the land before you hit the ocean. That's one way of looking at it. And there's a couple of verses in the Bible that indicate that, or that all the people came from all the corners of the earth or the ends of the land. And it could mean that. But in other passages, they see that the ocean then would have gone to where the dome came down. So you go to the ends of the earth, then you go further, because there's other language in the Bible called the ends of the heavens, which is the sky, the word for sky again. So if you go to the ends of the heavens, you can actually go from one end to the other. Again, all of this is perfect in concordance with flat. Okay, yeah. It's not if you go from one end to the other on our sphere, where do you go? You sort of keep going, don't you? I mean, you can't say, so the ends of the earth, ends of the thing has a little bit of fluidity, but it still fits the idea that you're going to come like Truman in the Truman Show. If anyone's seen the movie.
I was thinking of the Truman Show.
Yeah,
yes,
the Truman Show.
End of the film, end of the film, end of the sea, end of the sky,
and everything just sort of hits this thing. Well, they did think like that, and there's in the Book of Enoch, and is a reference to a more graphic understanding of this, where there's a journey taken to the ends of the earth and the ends of the heavens, to where the dome or where the sky and the land or the sky and the sea meet, on this sort of dome idea. And that could have been written 100 or so years before Jesus' time, or it could have been written 100 or so after, because the Book of Enoch is sort of redacted. But it does show you that even post Jesus, first, second century, there were flat earth assumptions then by Christian writers. And by the time we get to later writers, there was discussion, knowing the world was a sphere. If there's people on the other side, then they can't be anything to do with coming from Adam and Eve. There's all this sort of discussion, because it's just like, how did they get there, Anyway, so just to go on these sort of biblical things. The biblical cosmology has, just to sum up what it is based on this sort of graphic that we've got, is that the sun and the moon are small entities. They're lights. There's no indication the moon is a reflector of the sun. It's just there's a lesser light and a bigger light.
Yeah.
And the stars, they're all small, relatively speaking. They are all in the firmament, and there's water that was divided above the firmament. This has got nothing to do with the way we understand the Earth and the solar system right now. Nothing at all. It's completely disconnected. But you'll get into all sorts of trouble if you try to connect it. Okay, before we move on to talk about biblical cosmology and the actual incredible link, maybe quite obvious link to the rise in extreme Christian fundamentalists who have a highly vocal voice on the internet, are using biblical cosmology to back up the fact that we really are on a flat earth. I mean, we've got some listeners probably fainted by now, so give you time to sit up back on your chair, or park the car if you're driving. I just want to give a couple of verses before that, what I had mentioned before, about the dome, being Job 37. Can you beat out the vault of the skies? That's the same thing, the firmament, the expanse of the skies, as he does, hard as mirror of cast metal. Wow. That's one translation. I think it's the KJV, but they all say something along those lines. It's very difficult to remove the beaten out concept when you beat out metal.
Yes. So not a lot about the expanding universe.
To try to make that expanding universe is just seems to be silly to the text, and also to try and make it something that we think of. We're trying to read in our current atmosphere we accept science. We this ozone layer. We try to think of that in our mind and then read that. Who can beat it out? Cast metal. It's like this is it. If you want to be prepared. If you want to be biblical, be prepared for some surprises. This is a biblical verse. It's in the Bible. So if I go down, I've got another one here, which is the I think it's the quote from I've got John Loftus in his book, The Christian Delusion, Why Faith Fails. And there's a chapter in there on cosmology. And he goes, flat earth beliefs remained popular between the time of the last book of the Old Testament and the first book of the New Testament, also called the intertestamental period. One book composed during that period says, I went to the ends of the earth and I saw the ends of the earth whereon the heaven rests. So this is the sky, where the sky rests on the ends of the earth. In the book of Enoch, this was after 300 BC,
right?
And with the Greeks, so it didn't filter through. So that's another thing as well. And the book of Enoch, of course, is quoted in the New Testament, and so that's one particular thing. So I just wanted to do that, and now move on to the growth of the flat Earth movement. I first sort of came aware of I was always aware of the flat Earth movement as some sort of 19th century defunct sort of small group of nerdy people that really was just like an embarrassment thing, and no one ever talked about it. Boom! In about 2014 on YouTube was a massive flux of videos and people talking about and really challenging the spherical Earth understanding since the Greeks and all of mainstream science. And I couldn't believe it. It's these armchair critiques, and it reminded me of young Earth creationists who aren't scientists, who just go on YouTube and just have an attack at evolution, and they just sort of, it's not really presenting a worldview of their own, it's an attack at current science. A lot of flat earthism is an attack on current science of how we understand we're on a globe, and a part of that movement is secular, sort of non-Christian basically, and it's just almost like, is it a game that you're playing? Is it like you're just being the ultimate? Some people have said about the flat earth movement that some people are being the ultimate contrarians. They don't really believe it, but they just think, how can we just challenge mainstream science at every point and just be a contrarian and say, okay, so you say that the sun is that far away and the moon is this far away. Well, we're going to say that they're two small things in like the ancient cosmology, and we're going to say that explains why they look the same size. The sun and the moon do look similar sizes, and so they're just going with that. Or water finds its own level. You're in a bath, any kid knows that, it goes over the edge if whatever, and it finds its own level. So they think, hang around, that means the sea must find its own level. We have to be on the flat Earth. That's the simple logic that some people argue, And it's like, how can they do things like get a ball in front of a video, and they pour water over it, and they say, look, it's how does it doesn't work. You get a nice flat thing with a little saucer, put water in, levels. They do things like that. It's like, baby common sense.
It's not stupid by any means to believe in a flat Earth. Provided you don't have all the other information. I mean, the people who
they weren't stupid. No, they weren't stupid.
Yeah, the people who compiled the Bible, wrote the Bible, came up with this idea. It wasn't stupid to think that the Earth was flat. It made absolute sense. I mean, I think if I weren't being told that the Earth was round, if I say I'd sort of grown up on a desert island or something, and somebody had said to me, the Earth is round, I'd have said, are you mad?
Yes, that's right. That's
exactly completely mad.
You sound just like some current flat earthers, actually, because they think that. But it's like,
if you see ships coming over the horizon on your desert island.
Yes, you see, that's the thing. I don't know how flat earthers deal with that, and maybe Andrew, I don't know, maybe Andrew knows the answer, maybe he doesn't.
Yeah, they do deal with it in all kinds of ways.
The first thing you see is the mast, or if you're sailing towards a town, the first thing you'll see is the top of the tall buildings. So I mean, I don't know how flat earthers explain that.
They do in many ways. The thing is about, they remind me of young Earth creationists that are good orators. Like, I have seen evolutionists completely like trump whatever the word is, trounced on a debate by a young Earth creationist, because it's not to do a true evolutionary scientist is probably not a good speaker. They probably need 2 hours or a day to explain one point. You get an orator that isn't a trained biologist or scientist or anything, who just spews out these bullet points. Boom, boom. What about this? What about blah, blah, blah. And then the audience is with them, and they're going,
yes, cough. William Lane Craig, cough.
Gish Gallop, they call it. It's where you just have these bullet fire points, and the person can't answer. So the audience is already with them. Say, well, we were ready for this sort of debate, ready to change our minds, but look at him, can't even answer it. I can't. Yeah. Well, he's probably in shock at the absolute ignorance. So a debate sometimes doesn't actually work. And I listened to an audio of 3 flat earthers and a journalist. He absolutely trounced the journalist. He didn't know what he was talking about, and it made the flat earthers seem like reasonable, sensible, scientific people. So you have to be careful. I would never go on a show and argue try and argue for global Earth, because these people are saturated in their bullet point responses, and I would then need to go back to somebody who knows the science properly and say, right, can you just argue that one point for 3 hours with them? And then I'll listen to it, and so it isn't quite.
It's like the MMR vaccines, I mean, if you'll get somebody who's so steeped in the all the supposed I'm using air quotes here, facts about MMR, and you try and confront them with a few things, and they've just always got an answer.
And
because unless you've pretty much dedicated your whole life, which as lay people we won't have, to knowing how to respond to them, they're always going to beat you. They're always going to win that argument.
What you need to do, according to some people I've heard, is just get them talking to each other.
Absolutely.
Because this chap said, it's like a circular firing squad.
So that's a point that Andrew's made about diversity, isn't it? That you get the Christians talking to each other, and they're each saying, well, he's wrong, she's wrong.
You watch
this is flat earthers talking to each other.
The documentary on Netflix just shows that they have fractured into an incredible amount of different groups, and you've got people that saying this side who believe that there's an ice wall at the edge are just embarrassing us because we know it's a flat plane that's infinite, and so they're like the heretics, they're embarrassing us. Of course it's not an edge where you can fall off, and so you get these debates, and I thought, I've seen this before. this is like young earthers who split over something, or an old earther who splits with a young earther, and they fall out left, right and center, and a lot of their arguments are really critiques, like a critique at evolution from a some sort of pastor who's just picked up a load of critiques. They're the same. They don't say, right, the reason the world is flat is because we can sail this way. I don't know why somebody doesn't sponsor first of all, either a space trip up. They'd probably say they've all been drugged and it's hallucination.
Yes,
or why don't they sponsor? Why don't they say, under your terms, is it possible to keep going straight and come to the end? And why don't you do a trip that way? Oh no, I haven't got the money. I mean, I don't think anyone's done that. It's almost like it's just so silly.
Well, they did get this gyroscope in Beyond the Curve. That was very good.
And then it didn't quite work, did it? Because it showed that.
Yeah, that's right. So do you know what we're talking about, Francis?
No.
Okay, so well, I guess a lot of people listening have not heard of this. So in the documentary that I think you've been talking about, Beyond the Curve.
Yes.
They spent a lot of money to get hold of this really accurate gyroscope. And the point of a gyroscope is when the environment, say an aeroplane or something that it's sitting in, turns a corner, it keeps exactly the same orientation. So the idea is, as the Earth rotates, the gyroscope will adjust its angle compared to the building it's in because of the Earth's rotation, if it's really, really, really accurate and stable. So they spent a lot of money getting this, hoping that it would show that when you put it in a building, it doesn't rotate with the day. It just sits there pointing exactly the same way as the building does, because a building isn't sat on a globe that's rotating. But sadly, they got the wrong answer, and it rotated at exactly the correct rate in keeping with the Earth's rotation. And then what happened then next, Andrew?
Well, my memory was that I actually, to be honest, like a lot of these things, I do remember that incident. My memory was like a moment of cognitive dissonance, but it was not going to deter them.
That's right. They started putting it in cases of lead to see if it was getting some signal from something that was causing it to.
So rather than evidence saying, "Oh, this has actually challenged me," maybe there's an inkling that we could be wrong. It's more like, well, we know it's flat, so this somehow it's going wrong. The experiment's going wrong.
That's right. Yeah, yes. So they put it in this lead case or something, and that didn't make things up, but it didn't help. And so they discovered, well, there must be something. We just can't work out what it is. This is their experiment that they started for themselves. It's not like some bit of data that some evil round earther was throwing at them.
And they go so far to say that it's crazy to believe in a globe Earth, and then it's like we know it is, and then suddenly they do one of the top ones that's meant to be doing it. And there's been a couple of interesting things. Funny enough, I was researching yesterday. One of the guys that I remember having a Christian debate with another Christian on a flat Earth called Rob Skiba, and he was one of the big names in the flat Earth movement, the current modern flat Earth movement now. And it just turned out that he died. He was an anti-vaxxer, and he died of COVID about 3 months ago. He had been to a flat Earth conference, caught COVID and died. And he was actually preaching against the dangers. And funny enough, he came up with the ideal quote before he died. He said, one of us is going to be right. And I'm going to have to explain, this. And if I'm the last one, if I'm the one standing, then it will prove that I'm right. Of course, he died. So he actually really, and this is the problem, you see, a religious kind of guy like that, so extreme in flat Earth and anti-vax and conspiracies, it can lead you. It's not just like, oh, we'll just leave flat earthers to their wacky views. It leads to this kind of thing, him advising people not to take the vaccine because it might, it could be that something's going to happen and all the ones who take the vaccine are going to die. So I'm not. And then he gets COVID and dies. I only found out this last night, but that's a digression, because what I wanted to do was talk about the influence of flat earth cosmology from the Bible into the flat earth movement. And so when I did my research of people liking the program on Netflix called Behind the Curve, is it?
I think it's Behind the Curve, I think, not
Behind the Curve. That is a fractured group of people, but some of them are Christian people who really, they are saying, gosh, some of these other people are coming up with a science that challenges the globe. We've got a Bible that's already there, so it's merged together. So I wouldn't say it's the source of the flat earth modern movement. I'd say that it's a stream that's two rivers have come together through sort of secular versions of it, Christian versions of it, and therefore now you've got a little bit of so-called pseudoscience attacks on the globe, the way we understand it, and very much to people like Francis, like you were saying, if you're on an island and it's logical to think it's flat and it's like, we've only got up and down and water levels. Those kind of people are getting sucked into this because it's like, yeah, water does level. Well, how on earth does it go round? And what about, I've never understood how Australians are actually upside down, And so I can't understand that. And gravity, I never really get it. And, and so all of these people, it's actually being taught by ignorant people to just people who don't know, which is why a flat earther today can use the Bible in a fundamentalist church and say, we need to go further than we did. We accept evolution as a lie. We know that that's a conspiracy or whatever. We just need to accept the Bible and go this full hog and say, if the Bible, back to this praetorism thing again, if the Bible is correct and it's the word of God and it's inspired and God is saying that there's a hard dome and we're on a flat earth you can go to the end of and there's a Sheol underneath, then by golly, believe the word of God and don't believe this nonsense that the world is teaching you. That's where it goes in these churches. Very extreme churches making embarrassment to mainstream Christianity, absolute embarrassment. But it's because of the danger of, to me, I would say that this might be a cast iron reason for people to give up Christianity. If they see Christians saying we need to deny reality almost, at least if you understand, you either have to go conspiracy, all scientists are telling us lies, or you have to accept what the mainstream science community are generally saying with a few, quips here and there over various things.
Yeah.
But, you go the conspiratorial way and say everything is sort of like of Satan and we really are on a flat earth. And that's what's really influenced some of these people in the movement, including the guy that died. And, there's about 10 different big names on YouTube now that have got thousands of hits, so much so that YouTube have now put a disclaimer underneath every video saying that the flat earth is an archaic notion disproved 500 years ago, because too many people they found that YouTube was like, if you go to one flat earth video, it'll take you to another one, and all these kids at school will be suddenly bringing it up in classroom and saying, well, we've got people here who are saying that the Earth is actually not a globe. You see, it's dangerous. I'd say it's dangerous. So
I want to riff off a bit there again. Something from Behind the Curve. There was this lady who was disagreeing with other flat earthers, as they all do with each other.
Yes, they do.
And she started reading stuff people were writing about her, saying, did I see a shape-shifting look in her eyes or something like that? And which is like referring to the David Icke lizard men people.
Yes,
and all sorts of weird stuff that people were saying about her. And she said, hang on a minute. Well, I know that I'm a straight person who's just trying to get to the truth. And yet they're thinking that of me. How can they be so deluded about me? And it made her think.
Just for a moment.
In an interview, just for a moment, think, well, maybe that means I'm deluded about this whole thing as well, if it's that easy to be deluded. And then she kind of pulled back. This is just an interview. She pulled back. She said, no, I couldn't possibly be wrong. And so that kind of mirrored what you were saying about the kind of normal Christians looking at the wacky on the edge flat earther Christians, saying, well, if they can be so ridiculously deluded, why can't I be? And somehow they can't take that next step.
And
I'm not casting dispersions on people like our friend Steve Tompkins and people like that. Not that he's completely self-aware with all these things, and he knows that he's not basing his beliefs on anything more than kind of evidence, and then he knows when he's saying, well, I don't put words in his mouth, but he's not coming across as someone who's kind of resisting reality to hold on to his beliefs.
Oh, that's right.
I think.
I'll check with Steve whether he thinks the world is flat. That's right.
But I'm not talking about all Christians. I'm just talking about the kind of ones who are on the harder, more fundamentalist end of the scale. Who are denying science to stay in their beliefs.
It's the danger to me, a bit like even Michael Heiser was doing it. We don't want the pagan literature to be on par with scripture. We want it to be like this. It's almost like giving away your bias, which is quite honorable in a way. I'll give away my bias. I don't want scripture to be, but we have to accept this ancient cosmology as part of the Bible, but it's not the reality that we know, and move on from there. Whereas the flat earth extremists are going, Rob Skiba, by the way, the one who died, the one I mentioned who died of COVID. I actually first saw Michael Heiser. The first time I heard of Michael Heiser was in a video that he was doing, arguing for a flat earth. And he said, I'm just a preacher. I've got a podcast on a radio show. What do I know? Let me tell you, a Bible scholar. Cuts to Michael Heiser, all the clips where he's arguing for the flat earth in the Bible, without saying that obviously the scholar doesn't believe in the flat earth. He's just saying it's an ancient cosmology within the Bible. But he took it and used it for this. Look, it's not just me, but scholars think the Bible teaches a flat earth, and it's like, wow. So that was the first time I ever heard of Michael Heiser was in that context. So Michael Heiser had to do a blog to say, I don't believe in a flat earth. I'm just saying the Bible reflects it, And so, people say, Michael Heiser believes in a flat earth. There's something going around, And I thought, no, he doesn't. He's just a scholar who's saying what, and this is the thing. You'll get, fundamentalists like Praetorism who will take N.T. Wright and say, look, he has all this Praetorist stuff, and so it's not just me, this sort of pastor, but it's this scholar. N.T. Wright is a bit of a Praetorist in many ways. We'll use him to our advantage and then go the full hog. We've had this in the previous discussion on a podcast. So Christians are quite happy to use biblical scholarship in aid of their literalistic view. Strangely, it's just that the biblical scholar isn't a literalist. They're just arguing for what it did mean back then, but it's a big jump between that and actually going the full hog. And so I think the movement is dying down a bit now, but you've got it certainly it was massive on YouTube. You just have to type in, if you just type in YouTube, anybody listening, flat earth, boom, you'll get hundreds and hundreds of videos, debunking ones and ones pro, and then attacking each other. And so it's just like, and all this is going on while the science community are just having a laugh, probably.
Yes,
it's just a joke, you know.
Yes, I think the idea behind the curve wasn't just to have a laugh and enjoy it.
Oh no, no, no.
Was to shine a light back on ourselves that we are all able to be. That the point is, it's the community that draws you in, and when your community and your identity is tied up with an idea, it's incredibly difficult to give it up.
Absolutely. And that wasn't a scientific community that was coming together. When I noticed a lot of the backgrounds of people. They were kind of like talking, almost opening up about how isolated they were and they felt alone on the world, you know, and then you find this body of a community. So to be honest, they could have been that video could have been about people who, I don't know, loved bridges or something, you know, and just loved to design bridges. They all got together and felt family, home, welcomed, you know, or even if they were into something a bit more strange, but they got together. I found it was a community.
But be careful, I'm a civil engineer, you know.
Yeah. What meaning? What
we love talking.
Oh, we love talking about bridges. Well, again, if you found but if you felt all alone because nobody you knew could talk about a bridge, and then you found this whole community and said, we're going to have a trip and we're going to see 18 bridges. And then you got together and started talking about bridges and you'd feel like part of a group. And then if that group was then attacked, you would then start to think, oh, I'm not going to leave it. I'm going to defend it.
I remember a lovely debate in New Civil Engineer about what's the ugliest bridge in Britain.
Right. Yeah. What is it?
It's on the M25.
Oh, right. Okay.
When I go underneath it every time,
I thought you were going to say there was a huge debate and people fell out and split into two groups.
I'll tell you what the second most ugly bridge was in this poll. That's Tower Bridge in London.
Oh, wow.
Oh, really?
For an engineer, it's horrible.
Oh, wow.
It's got no engineering grace to it at all. It's just clunky.
Right. When I walk across that next time, I'm going to tell the person this has no engineering grace whatsoever. I know.
Second ugliest bridge.
Yeah.
But okay, so back on.
Sorry.
It's fine. I'm sure it's a bit of light relief for all of those people who are even thinking, what on earth are we talking about? Christians believing the world is flat. To me, the biggest thing I'm taking away from this is, like you said about the program, the power of belief to the human being. And we have to look at ourselves. We have to look at our biases and we have to say, what is it? I just think that mainstream science is a bit of sanity in a crazy world, you know, that something has got to hone us down. Otherwise, we're just a kite without a string and going to every wind of belief, getting a group and community to this extreme, you know, saying that all of modern science is wrong and all of the ancients somehow knew the real deal, which is what they're saying, isn't it? You know, Mesopotamians, Hebrews, they all knew what the world was like. They all knew it's a small sun, small moon, water's above, it's flat. Why did we change it? They say, why did we change it? You know, it's normally due to evidence, isn't it? Anyway, so basically that was really what I wanted to do today, was just really talk about both of these groups and the biblical cosmology. And it might lead anyone listening to go and research this. And I actually know a friend who was two people who were very close to becoming flat earthers, who Christian fundamentalists. So this is not. Oh yeah. I talked to both of them about it, and one of them was struggling with the fact of how could it be such a big conspiracy, but he was really persuaded that a lot of the modern ideas of showing that it's a globe. There's a friend of mine, I know him, and there's another guy in Australia whose neighbor or some other friend was a flat earther and was very much pulling him in that direction, and he wasn't quite prepared to commit. So that's two people I actually know for 30 years who are going that route, and that just shows you the power of belief, or the kind of friends I know. I'm thinking, it's all to do with the inspired word of God. They're so strong about it that if it says it, we got to go there. And that's, to me, is horrific. That to me frightens me. It frightens me. It really does. You might as well go up and, you know, do what Abraham did with the children if you're going to go that far. You know, Abraham was told by God to go up. I think he's telling me, you know, it's like, that's the huge frightening thing about inspiration. If you really think these things are of God, even at different times in the universe, to me, it's a frightening thought. So it's not just a laugh to talk about this. It's quite serious, really. Anyway, you know, so
so if Jesus turned up now, would he be a flat earther?
Oh, that would be good. Well, it depends on whether the father told him, by the way, it's not flat. That's right. When he ascended.
Yeah.
It depends on what knowledge Jesus had as an incarnation, I suppose. But you mean Jesus as I'm thinking theologically from a Christian point of view. If you're like he was just a human who lived and died.
Yeah, if he was just a human, then he wouldn't be.
Then he would come back, shot anybody that's lifted from the ancient culture in a Doctor Who TARDIS and arrives today, would probably could only think the world has gone crazy and they're all full of demons. So, probably.
Yeah.
Because how could you even contemplate a television, or seeing people on this little screen, or even a Zoom call like this from an ancient culture? You could only do what you could do, which is think, I'm in a crazy, take me back.
Yeah.
And so, well, that's what I would think. What would you think, Francis, if someone came back, was lifted, say, from, I don't know, just say Jesus' time, one of the disciples, let's just take John, lifted out, appears today in London?
I think it's it's hard to get your head round what it would be like. There was listeners in the UK of a certain age may remember the programme Catweasel, where a wizard was transported to the late 20th century. Was completely because he was a wizard in medieval times, he assumed that things like telephones and lights were a form of magic. So he would call the electricity, he would call electrickery, because it was all trickery to him. And I suppose there would be some similar sort of adjustment from somebody who had the culture shock of being brought from the early first century to the 21st century.
Yeah. And even more so that you would just think, well, medieval person, there was a film where they did that, brought medieval people back to the current state, and they were just going around modern New York. It was just almost trying to say what it might have been like, like there was one of the scenes in that film that really, really remembered, and he was trying to show this guy from the medieval period who was extremely wealthy was in the modern age, and he was trying to sort of get something, and he says, I have 18 cows and 5 chickens, and this was wealth, the other guy was looking at him saying, well, I own this estate building here. It's like, oh gosh. It's like, so from wealth back then, it's a different concept, and so with everything else as well, isn't it? And then they saw someone in the TV, and the guy went around the back to try and rescue them and not get the people out, because that was an interpretation of what a medieval person might think of little people in a TV, So anyway, so the whole thing today has been about ancient views of the world compared with modern, and how do we, if you're in faith, how on earth are you going to navigate that path? And that's really the essence of this episode, I would say.
Right. Yeah.
So, yes. Thanks, Andrew. It's been
I think we've
very
landed.
Interesting. Yep.
We've landed. And if you're on a cruise, any of you, and if you do hit that dome, let me know and I might change my mind.
Yes. We are always open to being
always open. That's evidence, isn't it? Just go on a view.
Evidence.
You have a Truman Show experience and I'll go, okay, so there's something to this.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But if I go right around the earth and end up back here, I think, seems to be a globe. Okay, so any other news points?
Not from me.
Not from me. No.
Okay. It always sounds like the end of Two Ronnies that we've mentioned before, that English program. Not from him, not from whatever it is. Okay, so right. So so anybody who wants to email, our email, Ed, is
that's loud@gmail.com, and allowed as in out loud rather than
so doubtsallowed@gmail.com. It'd be really good to hear any messages from anybody who's been listening, anything. But normally I see the podcast as a way to launch other people to do their own research, their own study, whether of faith or not, and just to be full of more knowledge, really, and see where that blends with your faith or non-faith. So until next time, I have been Andrew, your host.
I've been Francis.
And I've been Ed, and goodbye.
Bye.